Every Wednesday at exactly 11:45 in the morning, millions of American children lined up in cafeterias across the country to eat something no one could quite identify. It was gray, sometimes brown, always mysterious. Kids called it mystery meat, teachers ate it without question, lunch ladies served it in silence. And somehow nobody, not the students, not the parents, not even some of the cooks, ever really knew what was inside it. This is the story of the strangest tradition in American school history, a meal so infamous it became a joke that outlived an entire generation. If you grew up in America between the 1950s and the 1980s, you remember the sound. The metal tray sliding down the steel counter, the clang of the serving spoon, the steam rising off a rectangular slab of something. You didn't ask questions, you just ate. For millions of children, mystery meat wasn't just a lunch. It was a shared experience, a strange, almost sacred ritual that bonded entire generations of American kids. It showed up in home movies, in sitcoms, in comic strips. Everyone had a mystery meat story, and everyone told it the same way, half disgust, half affection. But behind the jokes was a real system, one built from wartime food policy, government contracts, and a nation trying to feed millions of children as cheaply and efficiently as possible. And today, that mystery meat has all but vanished from American cafeterias. This is the story of how it got there and why it disappeared. Picture a cafeteria in 1962, fluorescent lights humming overhead, rows of long folding tables, the kind with attached benches that pinched your fingers if you weren't careful. The smell hits you before you even walk in, a thick, steamy mix of boiled vegetables, warm milk cartons, and something meaty simmering behind the counter. Lunch ladies in white aprons and hairnets move like a small army, scooping identical portions onto steel trays with practiced precision. Everything has its place, a little compartment for the vegetable, one for the starch, one for the mystery. The centerpiece of the tray, more often than not, was some form of processed meat. A patty, a loaf, a square that didn't quite match the shape of anything found in nature. Some days it was Salisbury steak, a real dish, invented in the 1800s by a doctor who believed ground beef could cure digestive problems. Other days it was something closer to a meatloaf, pressed and baked into uniform blocks, then sliced like bread, almost like a strange kind of lunchline geometry. Kids didn't know the names, they just knew the textures, the slightly spongy bite, the grayish tint, the taste that was somewhere between beef, gravy, and cafeteria steam. And yet, there was comfort in it too, comfort in the sameness. Comfort in knowing that no matter what chaos was happening at home, at school, in the world outside, lunch would be exactly the same as it was last Wednesday. For a generation of kids raised on routine, mystery meat wasn't just food. It was predictability, it was normal, it was theirs. The lunch ladies themselves became legends in their own right, often working with almost no formal culinary training, stretched thin budgets, and equipment that hadn't been updated in a decade. They became the quiet architects of an entire era's food memory. Kids feared them a little, respected them more, and decades later, grown adults still remember their names: Mrs. Kowalski, Miss Ruth, the woman who always gave you extra if you said please. But few people ever stopped to ask where this meat actually came from in the first place. The answer traces back further than most people realize, all the way to 1946, when Congress passed the National School Lunch Act. The program was created partly out of concern that American men had been rejected from military service during World War II due to poor nutrition in childhood. Feeding children well, lawmakers argued, was a matter of national security. To make this possible on a massive scale, the government turned to a system of agricultural surplus commodities, meat, cheese, and produce purchased in bulk from farmers to stabilize prices, then distributed to schools at little to no cost. This is where the mystery truly began. Because commodity meat wasn't sold in neat, familiar cuts, it arrived in bulk, frozen blocks, unlabeled trimmings, whatever cuts happened to be in surplus that particular season. Cafeteria cooks, often with minimal culinary training and impossible budgets, had to transform these mystery shipments into something children would actually eat. The solution? Grind it, bind it, bake it into a loaf, add breadcrumbs, gravy, or ketchup to mask whatever inconsistency lay underneath. It wasn't deception, exactly. It was improvisation, cooks doing their best with limited ingredients and limited information, trying to stretch a government commodity shipment into thousands of meals a week. But because the meat changed from shipment to shipment, beef one month, a beef and pork blend the next, even the lunch ladies sometimes weren't entirely sure what they were serving. And if the cooks weren't sure, the kids certainly weren't going to find out. Across the country, the meal took on different names depending on where you grew up. In some parts of the Midwest, kids called it the brown brick. In parts of the Northeast, it was simply the loaf. In the South, some remember it fondly, almost defiantly, as Wednesday surprise. The dish was never officially the same thing twice, but the nickname mystery meat became the one thing that united cafeterias from coast to coast. The name wasn't coined by nutritionists or historians. It came from the kids themselves, passed down through cafeteria folklore, whispered between friends in line, memorialized in yearbooks and comic strips for decades. It became such a universal joke that by the 1970s, television shows and newspaper cartoonists were referencing it as shorthand for the entire concept of institutional food. But here's what almost nobody realized back then. The mystery wasn't just about flavor. It was baked into the entire system, a byproduct of a well-intentioned program trying to feed a nation of children on a shoestring budget, using whatever the agricultural surplus happened to provide that season. For nearly 4 decades, mystery meat remained a fixture of American cafeterias. But by the late 1970s and into the 1980s, something began to shift. Parents started asking more questions. Nutritionists began raising concerns about sodium, fat content, and the sheer amount of processed food being served to growing children. News segments and newspaper columns started poking fun, then scrutinizing the strange, unidentifiable lunch trays. Budget cuts in the early 1980s made things worse before they got better. Federal funding for school lunches was reduced, forcing many districts to cut corners even further. Ironically, this pushed processed, mystery-style meat further into cafeterias, right as public skepticism was reaching its peak. Then came the turning point. Through the 1990s and 2000s, growing awareness of childhood obesity, food safety, and nutritional transparency began reshaping school lunch policy. The Healthy, Hunger-Free Kids Act of 2010 overhauled nutritional standards nationwide, pushing schools toward fresh produce, whole grains, and clearly labeled proteins. Slowly, the mystery began to disappear. Cafeterias modernized. Ingredient labeling became mandatory. Parents could now see exactly what was in their child's lunch, down to the sodium content and the country of origin for the meat itself. Salad bars appeared where the old steam trays used to sit. Menus started listing calorie counts. The steel trays themselves in many districts were replaced entirely by disposable ones. The gray, unidentifiable slab that once defined an entire era of American childhood quietly vanished from lunch lines across the country. But something strange happened in its absence. People didn't celebrate the disappearance, they missed it. Walk into any online forum, any nostalgia Facebook group, any conversation among people who grew up before the year 2000, and eventually someone brings up mystery meat. It's become shorthand, a cultural touchstone, a word that instantly transports millions of adults back to a fluorescent-lit cafeteria, a metal tray, a friend sitting across from them making a joke about what might actually be on their plate. It wasn't good food by most standards, but it meant something. It meant being a kid in a simpler time when lunch was the same every Wednesday, when the biggest mystery in your life was what was hiding under the gravy, not what was happening in the world outside. Today's cafeterias look completely different. Labeled ingredients, nutrition facts, farm-to-table programs in some districts, choices kids in the 1960s could never have imagined. And in many ways, that's a good thing. Children today eat safer, more transparent, more nutritious meals than any generation before them. But ask anyone who lived through the mystery meat era and they'll tell you they'd give almost anything for one more Wednesday in that cafeteria. One more tray, one more mystery. Because it wasn't really about the meat at all. It was about being young, being together, not knowing what was coming next on the tray or in life and eating it anyway, surrounded by friends who were in on the same mystery. So if you remember Mystery Meat Wednesdays, if you can still picture the tray, the smell, the friend sitting across from you daring you to take the first bite, tell us in the comments. What did your cafeteria call it? Did your school have its own version of mystery meat? If this story brought back a memory you'd forgotten you had, share it with someone who grew up in the same era. And if you love uncovering forgotten pieces of American history like this one, subscribe to Lost Lunch Chronicles because the next chapter of the past is always waiting to be rediscovered.